Hello everyone, welcome back to the book pod. My name is Senna. Today I am really excited because I will be doing my monthly wrap-up for the month of June. I only ended up reading 7 books this month, so a little bit of a slower month for me, but I have just been kind of burnt out lately, and so I just wanted to take it slow this month. I didn't want to plow through a bunch of books this month. I just read when I could, read when I wanted to, and honestly it was a nice change in pace. Per usual, we did a couple of physical books, some books on my Kindle, as well as some audiobooks, and I am really excited to talk about those with you today. First book that I read this month was The Quiet Tenant by Clemence Michelin. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sorry if I'm not. So in this book, we follow a young woman who has been held captive by this man for the last 5 years. She has been trapped inside of this shed on his property, and when the book starts, he tells her that he needs to move and he can't bring her with because there isn't anywhere on this property that he can continue to hold her captive without his family finding out. Eventually, she does convince him to take her with. She stays in one of the spare bedrooms that they have. He does have a young daughter at home though, so they have to come up with a story as to why she's staying with them, how he knows her, and all this stuff. And yeah, the rest of the book basically just follows this woman and her still being held captive in his house and trying to decide if she wants to escape or not, because in the house she does have a better opportunity to than she did in the shed. So yeah. So I am gonna start off with the pros with this book because overall I really did not like this book very much. I know that's kind of an unpopular opinion. I did like the concept, and that is what got me to read this book in the first place. I've heard a ton of people talk about it, and anytime that I heard people explain what it was about, I thought, wow, that would probably be really interesting. So props to the author for the concept. I really liked that. I did really enjoy the ending. I think it was a pretty satisfying ending in my own opinion. I just think it took so long to get where you wanted it to go. The writing also wasn't terrible. It wasn't the best writing I've ever read, but it wasn't bad. Now on to the cons. It was just so long. I had a really tough time pushing through this book. This was another situation where I started listening to the book on Spotify. I used up a good chunk of my audiobook hours on there, and I decided to just plow through it and finish it. And I'm not saying that I regret reading the book, but overall, as a whole, I really did not enjoy this book, again, because it was very long. I also think that it was incredibly slow and boring for the majority of the book. I think it really didn't start getting intense until maybe the last quarter of the book. I was on the edge of my seat that last quarter of the book, and I did enjoy that last quarter of the book, but the first 3 quarters of the book was incredibly boring and really slow. I also did not really like these characters very much, and I do think a lot of this book was very unrealistic. I think this woman had so many opportunities to escape, and she did not take advantage of that. I do think that some of the things that the man who was holding her captive did were just so stupid. They were so dumb. He's been, killing girls for years. You think he should know by now what he needs to do in order to not get caught, and he just made dumb decision after dumb decision. It just didn't make sense that all of a sudden he wasn't being as careful as he normally would be. And on the victim's part, I don't know what it would be like to be held captive for 5 years. I'm sure that really damages you psychologically. So maybe I don't have the authority to judge her decision making. For me, it felt like on the outside looking in, some of the choices she made were a little idiotic, and I did not enjoy that either. Unfortunately, my first read of the month was only 2 out of 5 stars. Next book that I read this month was Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. This book is available on Kindle Unlimited. This book follows a woman whose sister had randomly disappeared 20 years earlier when they were in college. She hasn't seen her since. They never figured out what happened to her, if she's still alive or not. And now, flash forward to the present, another woman goes missing, and she can't help but feel like these two disappearances are connected, and she starts digging to see if that's true and if she can figure out what happened to her sister once and for all. I'm gonna be honest, since this was one of the first books I read in the beginning of the month, I'm having a hard time recalling how I felt about it. I don't feel like I had a strong feeling towards this book either way. I feel like I was pretty neutral. I did give this book a decent rating, but now that I'm thinking about it, I don't really remember a lot of the details of this book. I do remember liking it while I was reading it. I do recall that I enjoyed the writing to a degree. The characters were pretty likable. I do think that there were some twists that were thrown in there. I didn't really feel like we were gonna get a big twist in this book as I was reading it, so it did catch me off guard a little bit. So I did appreciate that. I did also enjoy the ending. I think it was very satisfying and I was content with it. It was pretty intense. It was fast-paced. It was difficult to put down most of the time. So those are the kind of thrillers that I really enjoy. I think if I had to say anything negative about this one, it would probably be that some of the decisions that the characters made felt a little silly, and also it was incredibly gory, and I know that's something that a lot of people will say when they talk about this book. There's a lot of torture in this book, and it was very difficult to read at times. Wouldn't necessarily say that's like a bad thing if you're okay with reading things like that, so I wouldn't say that's like inherently bad, but definitely prepare yourself if you're going to read this book because it's very intense, it's very graphic. Overall, I did enjoy this book and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. Book number 3 this month was The Grace Year by Kim Liggett. This book is available on Kindle Unlimited. Honestly, I feel like Goodreads has the best description for this book, so I am gonna read directly from the description on Goodreads. In Garner County, girls are told they have the power to lure grown men from their beds, to drive women mad with jealousy. They believe their very skin emits a powerful aphrodisiac, the potent essence of youth, of a girl on the edge of womanhood. That's why they're banished for their 16th year, to release their magic into the wild so they can return purified and ready for marriage. But not all of them will make it home alive. There is a second part to that description, but I'm not going to read it simply because I actually think the less you know, the better when going into this book. I did not know anything. I went in completely blind. I had no idea what it was about. I only read it because so many people recommended it. So a lot of people would describe this book as The Hunger Games meets The Handmaid's Tale, and I've also heard some people say that it reminds them of Lord of the Flies as well, which I also agree with. But I do want to add that it also kind of reminded me of Yellow Jackets. I don't know if you guys have seen that show. It's really, really good. I think it reminded me of that show because there were some witchy aspects to it, some ghostly aspects to it, as well as the fact that these girls are stuck in this cabin for a year's time and they're just trying to survive. And it kind of reminded me of Yellow Jackets in that way as well. This book was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it. It felt very dystopian, which was awesome. It was incredibly atmospheric. I felt like I was there, which was so cool. That's one of the best feelings. The chapters were really, really short. I read this on my Kindle, so I feel like each chapter was maybe a few pages long. Sometimes they were longer, but most of them were really, really short like that, which made it really hard to put it down. I just continued to read chapter after chapter because I was telling myself, well, each chapter is only a few pages. I can read another one. So that's always really fun. It was also a little creepy, a little eerie. I love that so much. There's also some romance in this book as well, which I wasn't really expecting at all, but I didn't mind actually. I typically do not read romance novels, but I'm okay with reading a genre that's not romance and then having a little bit of romance thrown in here and there. There are also a couple of good twists in this that I wasn't expecting, so that was great as well. If I had to say anything negative about this book, it would probably be that it was a little vague in the beginning, and that's probably my fault to an extent because I did not read the description. I had no idea what it was about. I do think I would have understood it a little bit better had I read that Goodreads description before I started reading it. I just kind of went into it really blind, so I had no idea what the grace year was. It was very vague in describing it to you in the beginning, so it kind of took you a while to understand what was happening. It was also a little slow at times. I would say a good chunk of the time it was pretty fast-paced, but especially in the beginning it was a little slow as well. Otherwise though, I really love this book. I definitely recommend it. Apparently it is technically YA, but it didn't feel super YA to me, so that's also good. At the end of the day, I really loved this book and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next book I read this month was Jackal by Erin E. Adams. This book follows a young 30-something-year-old Black woman. She is from a small town called Johnston, Pennsylvania. It's predominantly a white town, and she moved away when she graduated because she just didn't have very fond memories of her town and she wanted to get away from it. When she was younger, one of her classmates, who was also a Black girl, went missing in the woods and her body was found later. She was murdered, but it was always thought to be related to animal activity. Now, fast forward to present day, her best friend, who still lives in Johnston, Pennsylvania, is getting married, and she invites her to be a maid of honor at her wedding. She's a little reluctant to return back to this town that doesn't have very good memories for her, but she does for her friend. At the wedding, her best friend's daughter, who is also a young Black girl, goes missing in the woods, and it kind of seems like the past is replaying itself, and she starts getting to the bottom of the initial girl who went missing back when she was a teenager, and she also discovers that a lot of other Black girls had gone missing over the years, even after she left the town, and she needs to figure out who is doing this and why before it's too late, so she can save her best friend's daughter. So there are a lot of mixed reviews of this book on Goodreads. It has 3.65 out of 5 stars. I personally liked it a little bit more than that, but I understand why people gave it the rating that they did. I'm gonna start with the things that I really enjoyed with this book first. I think this is one of the most atmospheric books that I have ever read. It was so creepy, and it made me honestly really afraid of the woods. It was very descriptive, and I think that the writing along with that just really creeped me out. I don't know, it creeped me out. I loved that it threw you right into the plot, so you were just thrown right into it. It made me want to keep reading because I felt like, wow, things are this intense already. This is awesome. I listened to the audiobook for a good chunk of this until my hold ran out on Libby, and then I switched to the ebook and then read the rest on my Kindle. But when I did listen to the audiobook, I actually really liked the audiobook. I think whoever the narrator was for the book did a really fantastic job. I definitely think if you're going to read this one, that you should listen to the audiobook. What I really liked about this book more than anything, other than the atmospheric part of it, I did really like that I never knew what was coming next. I was constantly trying to guess who this murderer was and who was kidnapping all of these girls. And I kept switching back and forth between different characters. I just couldn't figure it out ahead of time. So I really did like that when it was revealed who the murderer was, that I wasn't prepared for it and I didn't expect it at all. That was definitely one of my favorite things about this book. Also, can we appreciate this cover? I love this cover. I feel like it matches perfectly with the book itself, the plot. I think it's a beautiful book. I think if I ever find this, a physical copy of this book at the thrift store, I'm definitely gonna pick it up because I love this cover. One last thing that I really liked about it is that it definitely did tackle real world discussions about race as well, which I think is very important. Now for the cons for this book. I think the main thing that people complained about, which I also very much agreed with, for some reason I thought I'd be the only one that felt this way when I finished it, but a lot of other people also felt this way. It was just very confusing at the end. I feel like I just wasn't 100% sure as to what was going on at the very end. When the last final things were starting to unfold, I just wasn't 100% sure about what was actually happening. There were some aspects to it that were almost kind of supernatural, and Yeah, I don't know. It was just a little weird towards the end. I don't know if I really liked the turn that it took at the end. It was just a little odd, but definitely unique, that's for sure. Otherwise though, I did enjoy this one and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read this month was The Reformatory. This book follows a young 12-year-old Black boy in Gracetown, Florida. This takes place during Jim Crow in 1950. One day he's walking with his older sister, who I believe was around 16, I think. And there is a boy around his sister's age who comes from a wealthy white family in the area. He starts harassing her, and so he takes action, he kicks him, and unfortunately he gets told on and he gets sentenced 6 months at the Gracetown School for Boys, also known as the Reformatory. It's rumored that some of the boys at the Reformatory are really talented at spotting ghosts, or haints is what they are referred to in the book. And our main character, Robbie, has a talent for this, and he's recruited by the superintendent of the Reformatory to help catch these haints for him. Meanwhile, his sister Gloria is trying to find any avenue possible to get him out before his 6-month sentence is up, because she doesn't feel that it was justified. This is a pretty big book. This was, I think, 560 something pages, so it's a very, very long book. Again, I'm going to start with the pros with this one. Overall, I did really enjoy this. I loved the paranormal aspects to it. It did feel also another book this month that felt really atmospheric. It was a little creepy when Robbie would see these ghosts. The way that he described them was very descriptive, and it was, again, really creepy. I also really enjoyed the social justice in this one and the karma for sure. It's a very, very enjoyable ending. It's incredibly intense though. I was definitely on the edge of my seat probably the last quarter to a third of the book. So my heart was racing. I was so scared for Robbie and what was going to happen to him. So I really loved how intense it was towards the end. I liked the aspects of historical fiction in there. I did read the author's note at the end, and although Gracetown is not a real town, there were some aspects and events that she talked about in this book that were true. Those were definitely my favorite things about it. Now on to the negatives. Again, this was really long, and don't think it needed to be this long. It was really difficult for me to get into it in the very beginning. I honestly don't feel like things really started happening until you were almost halfway through the book. So definitely be prepared for that when you're reading this and getting started. So another negative thing that I have to say about this book is that you kind of see things from both Robbie's and Gloria's POVs, and there were a lot of other people that said this on Goodreads as well. I don't necessarily feel like Gloria's POV was that important. I think we cut to her way too many times. I think I would have liked it if we focused more on Robbie's situation and his story versus going back and forth between him and his sister so often. So I think some of the things that she did, and I think some of what happened from her POV wasn't 100% necessary, and I do think that would have cut down the length of this book as well. Otherwise though, I did really enjoy this book, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The 6th book that I read this month was Unmissing by Minka Kent. This book is available on Kindle Unlimited. So in this book, you have a young 20-year-old woman named Lydia. She's freshly married to a man named Luca. They had a really quick Las Vegas wedding. They've only been married for a few months. They live in Oregon, and one day she decides to go on a hike while her husband Luca is out. So she gets on the trail, she starts her hike, and a man comes up behind her and knocks her out. And when she wakes up, she's in this tiny little cabin in the middle of nowhere, and he proceeds to torture her for the next 9 years. After 9 years, she somehow escapes. And the first place that she wants to go is find her husband. So she figures out where he's living now, because it's been 9 years, so he doesn't live in the same house as he used to. and she finds out that he is married to a new woman. He has a daughter and a son on the way, and she's basically just trying to get her life back. Okay, this was another book that I really did not enjoy this month. And I know it's a very unpopular opinion because this has over 4 stars on Goodreads, so don't listen to me, but I'm gonna tell you guys how I feel about it. Again, I'm gonna start with the good things first. I did like this concept. It reminded me a little bit of Still Missing by Chevy Stevens, which is a book that I read last year and I absolutely loved. Did not enjoy this one as much. I did like how she was kidnapped right in the beginning. Again, another book throws you right into the plot. So I got into it right away. I did actually listen to the audiobook for this book. I did not read it on my Kindle, even though I had it downloaded. I've just been doing a lot of audiobooks lately, so. But yeah, I did really like that it jumped right into it and it made it hard for me to want to stop reading right in the beginning, or listening, I should say. And also, there's a big twist in there that I actually was not anticipating. There were a lot of people in the reviews that said that they were able to guess in advance. I personally did not guess this twist at all, so that was pretty great. Now on to the cons for me. So first of all, I think this was one of the most unrealistic books that I have ever read. This is the kind of story that has actually happened to people. So this is something that can happen in our world, and I just don't feel like her actions made any sense to me at all. You think that if you were injured and you'd been missing for so many years, you had been tortured, you have been essayed, I think the first thing that you would do would be to go to the police or maybe a hospital, something along those lines. No, she decides to travel a distance to her husband. And I understand that she said that she wanted to be the one to tell him that she was still alive and, you know, she missed him, whatever. I'm just not buying it. I would go to the nearest police station, in my opinion, or the nearest hospital. I'm not going to be trying to find my old husband from almost a decade ago. And even after she told him that she was still alive, did she go to the police then? No, she does not. Does she go to the hospital? No, she does not. You know what she does? She tries to get a job and she tries to get back on her feet without even telling anyone that she's still alive. That simply just did not make any sense to me, and that was one of the things that bothered me the most about this book. One of the other things that really, really bugged me about this book was that the characters in this book, every single one, except maybe one that wasn't even that much of a main character at all, I did not like them. These characters were so unlikable. I wanted to feel bad for Lydia and what she went through for the past 9 years. And it's not like I didn't feel bad for her, but I just did not like her character whatsoever. And I think if I liked her character a little bit more, this maybe would have been a more enjoyable book for me. Overall, this book just really bugged me because of how unrealistic it was. And again, having unlikable characters makes it really difficult to finish a book, because if I don't have a connection to your characters, then why do I care to finish this book and figure out what happens to them? So ultimately, this was not a good one for me, and I only gave it 2 out of 5 stars. Okay, and for my final book of the month, Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. This book follows a family of 3. You've got Jen, who is our main character, and her husband Kelly, and her 18-year-old son, Todd. Essentially, the book starts off with, I believe it was Halloween, or maybe it was the day before Halloween, and Todd is arriving home late. Jen is looking out the window. She sees him coming home, but then she sees a man kind of creeping up behind him. All of a sudden, things happen so fast. Todd turns around, he takes a knife out, and he ends up stabbing this guy. Both of his parents run downstairs, try and see if this man's okay, and he passes away. Todd is then arrested, and both Jen and Kelly are sent home for the night. When Jen wakes up the next morning, she's like, okay, we gotta figure this out. We gotta try and figure out why Todd killed this man. Who was this guy? What's going on? We need to get a lawyer. We need to figure a bunch of stuff out. She comes out and she sees that Todd is back home. And after further conversation, she realizes it's actually the day before, aka October 30th, the day that the murder initially occurred. She's very confused. She doesn't understand what's going on. She goes to sleep that night. The next morning, she wakes up another day earlier. So every single time that Jen goes to sleep and she wakes up, it is a different day in the past. So sometimes she skips several days in the past, sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's months. It's crazy. She realizes that every day that she goes back into the past, there's a clue for her to find in order to determine why this crime occurred in the first place. I was a little bit nervous going into this one because I've heard some very mixed reviews on it. Overall, it has pretty good reviews on Goodreads. However, I've heard many people say that they do not like this book, so keep that in mind. I was not one of those people. I actually thoroughly enjoyed this book, and I'm going to tell you why. Again, this was another book I read this month that jumped right into the plot. I enjoyed how this crime occurred right off the bat, and she starts going back in time right off the bat as well, so you were just thrown right into it, and it made it really, really hard for me to stop listening to this book because I did listen to the audiobook for this one. I thought it was a very unique concept. I really, really enjoyed it. This book also kept me guessing pretty much till the very end. There was a lot of little twists in here. There's a big twist at the end as well, and they were great. I really couldn't guess most of these. There were some that I had suspicions about, but most of them I had no idea were coming. What I also really enjoyed about this book is that even though it was a thriller, there were a lot of important underlying themes in it as well. It had a really good take on the importance of relationships, importance of family, importance of the little things, and how quickly time passes by without even realizing it. And I thought that was really awesome. And I also really enjoyed the ending of this book as well. So overall, I really love this one. The only negative thing that I could say about this book, and the only reason why I couldn't give it a full 5 stars, is that it was really exhausting to listen to, I guess I should say, because I listened to the audiobook. I felt like I was Jen herself, and I was constantly going back in time, and I don't know, it just felt so long in some ways to where you're just like, whew, this is very exhausting and overwhelming, and I couldn't even imagine what it would be like to be in her shoes if this actually occurred. How tiring it would be to go back and every single day you have to try and discover some clue about this crime. She gets no rest. So I don't know, it felt a little bit that way while I was listening to it as well. But otherwise, again, I absolutely love this one, and I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Well, those were all the books that I read this month. Overall, had a pretty good reading month. You're always gonna have some books that you don't like, and I think I need to get a little bit better about DNFing books, because I probably could have DNF'd both The Quiet Tenant and Unmissing this month to avoid wasting my time on them. But sometimes, even though I'm not really enjoying a book, it has to be really bad for me to DNF it. I think sometimes I still want to know what happens, I guess. Maybe I should just spoil it with Goodreads reviews that have spoilers. I don't know. But I need to do better about doing that for myself because it's just a waste of time sometimes. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what your thoughts are on any of the books that I read this month. If you have also read them, let me know if I've convinced you to read any of these books, because I always want to know those things. Thank you guys so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Happy reading!